Nothing that dramatic and awful happens out of nothing.
Had been wounded and they died there.
Well, the Bear River Massacre was, like all historic incidents, was the result of a lot of different things coming together and resulting in a big event.
Bear River Massacre was the largest massacre in the western United States.
It's not written down in the history books.
There were stories that you didn't quite believe because it was a little hard to understand that things of that magnitude could actually happen.
There have been archaeological digs that place evidence of human occupation in the Great Basin at least as early as 5000 BC.
So people have lived here for a long time. The history of the northwestern Shoshone doesn't go back that far. I suspect just a few thousand years for those people, if even that.
We talk about the Shoshone, and yet you need to realize that the Ute language is very similar because they were originally part of a larger group. The Paiutes, the Goshutes, the Comanche, they all originally spoke the same language.
The Shoshone Nation at that time covered a vast area geographically, from the north up near the Salmon River country, the Idaho-Montana border up at the Continental Divide. There were Shoshone living in that area, all down through eastern Idaho and south-central Idaho, central Nevada, north-central Nevada. They covered, lived in northern Utah in the Cache Valley and the Salt Lake Valley, and up into the Bear Lake Valley, into Wyoming, over into the Wind River Mountain area, and they covered down into all of southwestern Wyoming as well.
I think it's perhaps important to mention that the Shoshone allied themselves in what they would have called bands. And a band could be anything as small as perhaps 2 or 3 extended families. It could be as large as 200 people.
Because of the scarcity of resources, they would only form groups large enough or small enough to survive on the resources that were available in the areas they could easily get to obtain food. These small bands would then trade and join forces with and congregate with other small bands to form larger groups, and then based on language and culture, and they would grow and expand as the population did and branch off into new smaller bands, but generally they existed just in extended family units. When the white settlers started coming in and brought in European notions of government, the whites really forced a more cohesive organization within the Indian tribes. So the whites wanted to know who to talk to about what and who was in charge and who they could make treaties with and agreements. And the Indians didn't typically organize themselves in that way. So the formal organization of bands and tribes was more a result of the white intervention.
It was the government agents that decided to call them the Northwestern Bands, I think because people that spoke Shoshone and were in the Utah Territory lived in North and West Utah.
The Northern Shoshone, and within that there was a subgroup called the Northwestern Shoshone.
So while the Shoshone wouldn't have called themselves the Northwestern Bands, they knew that it was referring to them when they heard that term.
When the Mormon settlers came, they came and stayed. And from the very beginning of white arrival in this area, there were difficulties between the Indians and the whites.
To Mormon theology, the Indians, although they would have considered them degraded, and fallen, they nevertheless were fellow Israelites, according to Mormon scripture, the Book of Mormon. And so the Mormons knew that they had to at least try to treat the Indians in a different way, in a better way.
The Shoshone would steal horses or they would steal cattle, and the Mormon pioneers would send out people to try to retrieve them, and they had very bad luck doing that. They could never seem to save any of the livestock that had been stolen. And there were clashes where either settlers or people passing through were killed by Indians, and Indians were killed by whites.
What makes it worse is that in November of 1862, a brand new route from northern Utah to the gold mines of Montana and Idaho was opened. Well, that's fine. The problem is that this new road for these miners was a half mile from the winter encampment of the Shoshone.
Some Shoshone young men stole some horses and some supplies from these people, and these miners crossed the river over into Richmond and got help from the Mormons to get some of this stuff back, which they did. But then when they were crossing the river, the Shoshone young men were angry and upset, and so they killed one of these miners. And
his colleagues make it to Salt Lake, and William Bevins, one of the miners, goes to Chief Justice, Territorial Justice John F. Kinney, and swears out an affidavit about what had happened. Justice Kinney believed the story completely, and it was largely told with accuracy, and instructs the territorial sheriff, Isaac Gibbs, to go arrest Chief Bear Hunter, Chief Sagwitch, and Chief Sandpitch, who were believed to be over the tribes that had caused this. Well, poor Marshal Gibbs, he's told to go into the heartland of the Shoshone and arrest their 3 chieftains. There was no way that he was going to attempt that alone. He knew that couldn't meet with success. So he asked this Chief Justice Kinney if he could ask Colonel Connor for a military escort.
Patrick Edward Connor was a colonel in the United States Army. He was living in Stockton, California at the time the Civil War started, and he'd had a long history in the military. And he was in charge of a militia unit over there at the time in Stockton. And he went on active duty during the Civil War and was put in charge of a column of soldiers who volunteered from California, intending to go east and fight in the Civil War, but instead they were sent to Utah.
You have the Shoshone who are desperate for food for their people. You have Colonel Connor, who is anxious to be on the battlegrounds of the Civil War, and he's stuck out in Utah territory and looking for something to do. Shoshone got together in the winter, and you might have 3 or 4 of these bands of 100 or more people gather together for the winter encampment.
Sagwitch always tried to make accommodation with the white settlers. He wanted to get along. I think he realized that these people weren't going away, and there would just be more and more of them coming, and they had to learn to live together.
Sagwitch, who always arose early, was up and looked out and over the crest of the hill, because they were down in the valley where the river ran. Looked up and he saw what he thought was steam rising from the crest of the hill, and he thought that was rather strange. And then he thought, well, maybe it's from horses up there. Well, maybe it's the soldiers that are coming to talk to us.
So he, all along, after the miners had been killed and after Tin Dup's dream, he sort of assumed that the whites would come, and they would make a lot of noise, and they would argue and carry on, and they would have some kind of a powwow.